Deep in the bowels of an icy tundra, something ancient awaits. Impressionable, disturbing idealists are carving their way through the landscape in pursuit of what they believe to be greatness, and you are a penguin. It's an immediately compelling setup for the latest venture from the developers of Umurangi Generation, in which you play as a colony of penguins investigating eldritch uncertainties on the ice. Your language set is primarily that of the stalwart flightless bird, waddling along, sliding on your belly, making use of momentum to launch yourself across this surprisingly vast space. Your experience is often lonely and isolated, met only with the fractured howl of an Arctic wind and a few choice Lovecraftian verses, beautifully narrated. And then you start to find evidence of others. The abandoned husks of research stations, torched barracks, proud banners of a vile ideology. Marching towards the unseemly red glow of a panicked flare, you realize with some uncertainty that what lies buried here is too much for mortal men to conceive. This is, unsurprisingly, a hell of a vibe. An interactive adaptation from an entirely different kind of perspective. It feels like a lost PS2 game, but at the same time so very clearly its own thing. Even in this brief introduction to the game, there are no punches pulled. You can see the energy of Origami Digital's previous work in full flare. It's a horror story that doesn't shy away from politics. You get to see Nazis driven mad by things they were never meant to be in the presence of. That's sick as hell. This is potentially the most exciting upcoming release of the year for me, and my time with the demo only sought to stoke my interest.
This discovery far outweigh its strange circumstance.
Mimic Meadows is a new entry in the library of incredibly cool looking and enduringly esoteric puzzle games. Welcome back, Baba is you! This time you're aping the movements of a variety of creatures in order to make your way through an unusual kind of maze. Your movement is limited to certain ground types, but each animal you encounter has the ability to traverse a wider part of the world. The deer frolic through the forest, the fish swims in the river, and so forth. Position, direction, and location are everything as you move towards each puzzle's goal, but there are also hidden systems, such as animals mimicking one another, that factor into the puzzle design quite early on. I found this a bit tricky to get my head around. Very quickly the game makes a statement that it knows it can't simply rest on the same patterns of engagement all the way through. There are levels in which you have to really put your imagination to the test, looking beyond the visible confines of the game's visual interface to see the path forward. I'm a bit too thick for all that, which is why I also didn't get very far with Bubba As You, but I can't say that I wasn't charmed by what I played here. I can see on the horizon a lot of mind-melting conundrums that require a full and accurate understanding of how the underlying mechanics of the game work, not something you can brute force. Maybe not something I'll be able to find my way through in the full release, but it's certainly an exciting prospect to find new ways to freshen up an already stuffed genre. And why not follow up with another Sokoban? It's a contentious genre, I know, but I kind of love them. Outpour has you playing a little gargoyle fella, using your block-pushing prowess to direct the flow of water and take your place on a perch. Based on the demo alone, it looks like the game is keeping things clean and uncomplicated, with the stage design coalescing with a simple set of rules, and this alone doing a lot of the heavy lifting. There's quite a fair bit you can get out of simple interactions, although I do have some concerns about the readability of the game. There were times where I wasn't quite sure what I was aiming for, as Outpour chooses not to highlight your end destination in the way that so many other Sokoban titles do. I suspect, however, that this is omission by design and filters into the trial and error stage of gameplay. If there's only one solution to each conundrum, then the goal will inevitably reveal itself over time, but I still found it hampered my enjoyment of an otherwise cheerful and quickly fiendish block-pushing puzzle adventure. This is one for the purists, I feel. No gimmicks, no razzle-dazzle, just a simple, focused puzzle experience that revels in the inherent complexity of a three-dimensional space. Last year's Many Nights a Whisper was an experience that solidified itself within a breathtaking specificity, an enthusiastic grab for identity that made that game so much more impactful for what was absent as much as what was there. Small-scale, focused ideas have always been a winner in my eyes, and so, given the opportunity to try out Selkie Harbour and Deconstruct Team's latest venture, Virtue and a Sledgehammer, I couldn't say no really. An existential rage room, you're tasked with returning to your hometown, finding your sister and, put simply, tearing the place down to the ground. Immediately it's clear that this is a far more substantial experience than Many Nights a Whisper, with a beautifully realised environment to burst your way through. Mechanically it's quite simple, but the impact of your actions remains incredibly cathartic as buildings shatter and collapse around you, each swing of the titular sledgehammer opening up more of this town to explore. Violence as a doorway. It's a hell of a metaphor, but the game's narrative builds out impressively from it. The game also teases a hell of a mystery at its centre, as you get glimpses of what the relationship between these two siblings is, but not quite why one of them is pursuing the other with such murderous intent. It's that specificity again. It's the output of a creative team who know a thing or two about audiovisual storytelling and have crafted an impressively captivating model village to break apart in the process. Put simply, I loved what I played. I loved it enough to stop the demo early because I know I'm going to dig deep into this when it finally launches. A really kinetic, stylish piece of interactive fiction that I suspect will venture down some very dark corridors before its conclusion. I can't wait. I'll be honest, I'm not massively au fait with Mancala, nor have I played it directly, although we've certainly crossed paths in one medium or another over the years, but I couldn't help but be intrigued by this striking take on the centuries-old classic board game. Ware is a game about moving marbles between pits, utilising the core rules of Mancala as its language base while layering it on more contemporary ideas found in other genre mashups. Additional effects on certain marbles like extra damage or the ability to heal, a mana system that allows you to perform special moves at cost. The usual staples of any run-based game that wants to keep things fresh from session to session. The meta structure of the game is very part and parcel with convention, but what I found quite refreshing was how mechanically pure the core gameplay loop is. It's a game about making strategic choices, including when not to attack if it risks putting a knife within your opponent's reach. The board cycles both ways as you move your marbles across it, so you really have to take stock of proximity and volume when picking where to move from. New marbles with different effects spice up the gameplay a fair bit, but that core idea remains fairly consistent throughout. My one gripe with the experience of the demo is that the user interface is a little slow. Some elements linger a bit too long for my liking. I really want to impress on game developers that most people like to run text and menu prompts at their own speed. It drives me mad when I've read a section of something and then have to wait several seconds before I can move on. Keep things zippy and you'll find a happy gamer on the receiving end. Ware is a game with a strange title. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, to be honest. But it has a solid grasp of its own identity, and although I think this is probably not the game for me, I can still give it a solid recommendation because what's there is worth your time. Project P.I.T., at first glance, is one of those incremental games, although the act of playing it feels anything but. Manually cranking out a supply of rubber ducks to feed an ominous hole at the centre of this dark, dank factory, its progression is defined by a more efficient churning out of product. The more you feed the hole in one go, the higher your combo meter and thus the greater the monetary reward, one that you can really only spend on making it easier to make even more money and throw even more ducks into the hole. It has those similar borderline evil hooks that incremental games joyously bathe in, but even in my brief time with the demo, I could see that there was something else going on here. Certainly it builds itself on the same compulsion loops that titles like Cookie Clicker and Tower Wizard have honed, but there is this additional layer of complication that comes in the form of your actions being quite heavily physics driven. You start with just the ducks, manually moving them from the machine to the hole, with a laborious strain I should add. Then you unlock the ability to create a box to put them all in, but it's still a bit of a crapshoot how many will exactly fit, and as they get fired out of the machine in a slightly chaotic arc, you're still finding yourself mopping up strays in the process. Everything feels like slightly too much work, and I suspect that that might be the point. From the game's trailer, it looks like things do get a bit more automated as you progress, but it also definitely feels like there is more than meets the eye here. Brutalist PSX satire, it calls itself, and yeah, I see the vision. I keep ping-ponging between loving and hating the art style of this next demo, a crude, puerile journey through hell as you build yourself up to taking on the devil himself in a game of cards. It's a poker roguelike, although not quite in the way you're expecting. The rules of the game are simple. You have 5 cards, you can remove and replace any number of them once per round. Whatever you end up with, you are scored on the basis of poker rules, and the pairs, trios, and flushes translate into a numerical value added to your attack and defense. If your attack is higher than your opponent's defense, then they take damage, and vice versa. A straightforward and honestly quite satisfying system that's made more chaotic by the introduction of a cheats system, whereby you can select a number of abilities to alter the state of either player's hands. You are not limited in how many times per hand you can get to do this, however each move increases your foe's suspicions of you, and if you get caught out, the consequences are quite devastating. Time will tell if the Devil's Due has the staying power of its cohorts. I do feel like it's a little too rudimentary in its systems, but then again, poker has been around for well over a century, so maybe we've all been brain poisoned by modifiers and metagame play and all that bollocks. It's fun, it's also quite gross. Take from that what you will. So this next demo is a really fun time. A first-person fingerboard simulation, which is, a little weird since fingers don't have eyes. How can they be first-person? But, whatever. You approach a sequence of challenges that test your maneuverability, spatial awareness, and understanding of some surprisingly nuanced physics going on in the background. Think more Trials than Tony Hawk, where you really have to plan your moves carefully, but returning to the start is lightning fast, thus encouraging the pursuit of mastery in a very satisfying way. These tracks are focused on speed and flow, and your board behaves in a quietly complex way. Speed is determined by gravity, and sometimes the way forward lies behind you, requiring you to manage a couple of loops to build up momentum before you have the power to clear a gap. It's not just about going fast though, and part of the challenge, and therefore the fun, is working out the perfect balance in order to navigate some really tricky obstacles but still get to the finish line in time to collect gold. This tiered medal system has always been a brilliant facet to encourage replayability, and here is no different. What's supporting these endeavours also is a phenomenally good control scheme, where movement is tied to the mouse with only 2 other keyboard functions, jump and drop. The combination of such modest mechanics even in this demo shows a lot of promise, and although there is probably some need for polish here and there in the lead up to launch, what's already present is such a good iteration of this particular brand of game. Koromeke is, in essence, a digital board game, one in which you're in control of every player piece. It starts simple with 1 pawn, a couple of dice, and a modest loop to progress through. You're collecting diamonds and can only bank them once you complete a loop. Reach a certain target before your moves run out, the board levels up, you get more moves, an extra loop, and a second player, and then a third, and then a fourth. And this is where the game gets really interesting, because each loop is assigned to a particular pawn, but they all overlap around the starting region. Crossing the streams grants you extra diamonds, and coupled with a number of additional effects sewn across the board periodically that add another degree of complexity to the mix, and the whole thing develops this intricate strategic layer that means you cannot rely on just rolling the dice and hoping for the best. The demo stops at a certain point with 4 pawns in the mix, so I'm curious about how far the game expands, whether the size and pawn count caps here and instead the increased complexity comes from additional modifiers, or if it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and either way, whether it continues to retain a sense of coherence the messier it gets. Something I've always been a bit wary of is when a small, unassuming game becomes a mega hit and then the market gets flooded with copycats. This is what happened with The Exit 8, a short, sharp horror game that was 1 part maze navigation and 1 part spot the difference. Elegant in its simplicity, it inspired a lot of folk to copy the core mechanics, but maybe not quite understanding what it was that made that primary work so compelling, either by doing too much or not enough to distinguish themselves. I'm a bit dubious about the point of it all. I almost wasn't going to bother with turning manor, as it seemed to be more of the same, but there was something in the trailer that intrigued me, and I'm glad I stepped in because this is a really elegant and interesting version of this genre. You're still doing the same core thing as the Exit 8, travelling down a hallway, keeping note of anomalies. This time you have a clicker to count everything that's not quite right, and a choice of 2 doors at the end, even and odd. The correct one depends on the number of anomalies within that loop. This in itself doesn't change things up too much, it's just a different arrangement of how to conclude your assessment, but the game also layers in these other elements that I wouldn't quite say are Blueprints-esque, but certainly allowed that game to spring into my mind while I was playing. You can peek into rooms for a glimpse at something strange, notes appear periodically hinting at something else going on here. Every now and then something truly unusual will happen. I can't tell if this place is haunted or if it's a magician's box of wonders, but it's all rather intriguing. It might just be extra fluff to disguise the fact that the game doesn't have a great deal to offer beyond that simple premise, but it's one of those things where they've put a lot of effort into incentivizing you to keep playing. It is a little odd that despite having a run-based structure, any successes are banked permanently, so there's not much in the way of a penalty for not getting the right door at the end. I'm curious to see what the feedback will be on this one when the full game comes out, as there are more regions of the manor to investigate and perhaps a wider metagame to engage with in the process. Blueprints name-dropped once again as a source of inspiration for this strange esoteric gardening puzzle. Plant seeds, tend to them so they grow, encourage wildlife to visit and figure out the right conditions for getting the fabled black flower to bloom and change your life forever. It's a game of chance as much as it is strategy, which is why I think the comparisons to Dogubom's magnum opus are, at the very least, a little apt. You're relying on weather patterns working in your favour to prevent your crop from withering before it's come to bloom, although you can spend some seeds to influence that outcome. And there's a drip feeding of information about the various interactions of each element and how to trigger the right conditions. And it's clear that the whole thing is one intricate puzzle box that will require trial, error, and a keen inquisitive eye to get to the centre of, which obviously is not apparent for me from the footage you're watching right now. I think this could potentially be a cult favourite sometime down the line. Visually it's quite simple, but that mechanical core is sophisticated enough to hold it up, and it does feel like quite a mysterious sandbox to engage with. This right here, this is the dystopian megastructure parkour game of your dreams. Vholume is a blisteringly fast race through the bones of a staggeringly scaled brutalist city, one you sail through at such a rate of knots that you don't even have time to consider why exactly it's bereft of anything resembling civilization. It's got a great look, feeling like you've accessed the debug menu of a lost Fumito Ueda game, a strikingly different hue to the grey gloom that usually accompanies this type of urban decay. Amongst the concrete and iron, you find yourself in a gleeful flow state, rocketing yourself across municipal chasms and up man-made mountains, all with an intuitive sense of direction and spatial awareness. It has all the staples you'd want from a first-person parkour game: running, jumping, riding along walls, a deeply satisfying power slide, and the knowledge that these moves all interlink and synergize in ways that are essential to making your way through some of the more biting challenges. There are spaces that seem a little too wide to vault, and gaps a little too narrow to make through at breakneck pace, and yet it never feels like any of this is unachievable. This is the stuff I come to Nextfest for. An appetite whetted by the hands-on encounter with something truly brilliant. This really is one to watch. Mind Inc.'s gameplay will be instantly familiar to anyone who has played the excellent Wilmot Works It Out. Digital jigsaws are something instantly appealing, and I feel like this particular iteration will do well as the cozy game of choice for many folk. Something to chip away at periodically on rainy afternoons, mixing up the pattern recognition of traditional jigsaw pieces with some quite deft puzzle solving alongside it. Each level has an image to assemble, but also a small sequence of gates and obstacles to navigate in order to collect the pieces in the first place. It's such a simple but clever mix-up of the formula, where the reward is this cathartic piecing together of a tableau, still bite-sized enough that I think it would slot in perfectly around any other games you're playing at the same time. With the keyboard controls, I had a touch of executive dysfunction trying to get my head around using Q for picking up blocks and E for putting them down, so I think this will work better with a controller, but nonetheless I found the same joy playing this as I did the Wilmot games, and I am curious to see how Mind Inc. evolves over the game's runtime. What if Metal Gear Solid, but you're the radio operator trying to help Snake avoid getting killed? An inspired premise that most certainly has been applied to other games before, but the particular interpretation found in Burn 9 is a decidedly stylish, slick mix of point-and-click adventure, visual novel, and strategy game that revels in a lightning-fast approach to narrative design. Starting with a downed helicopter and a lone survivor, you're tasked with infiltrating a facility that most definitely does not want you there, working around the confines of a limited field of vision, a broken communication system, and a whole lot of unknown dangers awaiting you along the way. Because this is so heavily reliant on its story and tone, the success of Burn 9 will most likely be leveraged on how well you get on with its writing, which I did find a little childish in places. You aren't going to be finding Disco Elysium level prose here, but it does serve a purpose, and one thing working in the game's favour is that it doesn't bog you down in world building or exposition. What I played in the demo was fairly linear, as a means of explaining how its systems work, what is expected of you and what the consequences of poor decisions will be, but it did culminate in a more open and tricky navigation sequence, which I suspect the wider game will be more like. Exploration at odds with survival, where every action must be considered independent of the knowledge of its outcomes. This is a really cool game. I think you'll like it. I don't really like fishing games, but I came to this next demo purely on the basis of its atmosphere. A really striking visual direction that feels like an overly ambitious cheating of old hardware. As its title suggests, this is a game about fishing. And those central mechanics are pretty solid. You use the mouse to flick your rod across the lake and maneuver your ensnared prey into your loving arms to take back to the tackle box and an approving chain-smoking gentleman who has big uncle energy. I'll admit I don't have much patience for games like this. I feel like I lack the hand-eye coordination to properly make the most out of the systems at play here, and I am too impatient for any game that requires me to wait. I can just about cope with Animal Crossing. Also, given how animated you need to be with the mouse, my current setup for my PC isn't really suited to this game, but it does look amazing. I love the character models for both the humans and fish, some really excellent artistry going on, and I think that might be enough for me to give it a proper look when it launches.
When we catch this guy, I'm gonna give him a big piece of my mind.
Let's take Jonathan Blow out of the equation for a moment and look at this new offering a bit more objectively. Billed as a wildly ambitious mega-structure of a Sokoban game, yes, this is the third time this video I'm talking about this genre, it's a project that has brought together the work and ideas of a number of creative minds, not just that of the contentious lead designer of The Witness and Braid, but how is it to play? A bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. The puzzle design speaks for itself. From the modest offerings of the demo, we are exposed to some great taxing iterations of those familiar block-pushing delights, including revisions of older puzzles under different considerations, which is a really smart way to expand variety and highlights just how clever some of these individual conundrums are, that they can be solved multiple ways. This side of the game is really solid, putting to rest, I think, a lot of concerns that Blow and his team had spent a decade making just a Sokoban. This will delight any fans of the genre, but it also makes it all the more frustrating that Order of the Sinking Star feels horrible to play. The character models are simultaneously weightless and stodgy, defined by unnecessary animations, and there's this fraction of a second delay in your inputs that, while not exactly making it unplayable, it's just pushing blocks after all, still makes every move feel absolutely agonizing. Bad game feel is a killer, and coupled with this is an incessant chatter that permeates each room. The cast of Order of the Sinking Star simply do not shut up, and I don't even know what the value of all that dialogue is, because the story, as presented in this demo, doesn't seem all that interesting. It's frustrating because I am genuinely curious about where this game will take such a well-worn genre, but once again I fear that a man who loves the smell of his own farts has not quite figured out what people actually like about his games.
Still don't understand how I got out of there. Some kind of intervention from afar.
Having recently gone to great lengths to explain why I think Cairn is going to be one of those generational interactive works, I've had mountaineering on my mind. And so, given the pitch for Ascenders Beyond the Peak being essentially Cairn meets Into the Breach, I was immediately on board. The experience itself, as presented in this demo, is an interesting turn-based roguelike interpretation of what such a Herculean task would be. You're ascending a mountain as a party of 3, each member having their own role to play within the climb. Parts of the rock face become increasingly unstable should you linger, so there's a pressure to move ever upwards, but you are also constrained by an ever-draining stamina bar, which is only refreshed by finding stable footing along the journey. Should it reach 0 for any of your team, they fall. And it's up to you to direct their cohorts to come to their rescue, should they be able to do so. Each section of the climb is its own instance, with encounters in between that offer up snippets of narrative and difficult choices to be made that can have an impact on your climber's well-being. This wider layer of design feels quite similar to games like FTL. There's a sense that you're not just engaging with what's right in front of you, but also the long game, and how your choices, even the ones that seem quite small and inconsequential, can have this cascading effect. This was a really interesting thing to engage with, and while I wasn't completely blown away with what I played, it's definitely something I'll be keeping my eye on in the future. A sign of a great demo is when you stop playing it early because you know you'll be jumping on board when it comes out. And in the case of Toem 2, not only did I do this, but I also immediately got up to go download the original game on my Switch to give it a replay. That first title was a delight, a really striking, culturally specific adventure game all about taking photographs and solving problems, all the while exploring a beautiful monochrome world, one packed to the gills with secrets and gorgeous prop work. It made perfect sense to me that this got inducted into the permanent collection of the National Video Game Museum, and its sequel is looking like it might continue that trend. More Toem is already an exciting prospect, but there's an instantly noticeable facelift found here, albeit one that doesn't take away from that original art direction. The extra bells and whistles only add to the experience. Subtle animations and additional effects, a more freeform camera, and a load of new spaces to explore. Honestly, just look at it. Why wouldn't you want to play this? I especially like the quirk of new tools being camera attachments, even if it doesn't really make sense for them to be that. In the demo, you use a screwdriver to navigate certain puzzles by using the camera's viewfinder. It's a really cute way of engaging with the core language set beyond the confines of take photo, take another photo, and I just know that this is going to be one of those day one purchases for me. I'm sure many of you had already clocked that Silver Pines is one to watch. It's got such a distinctive look to it, a moody, ethereal 2D survival horror that feels one part Resident Evil, one part Deadlight, with a touch of Alan Wake in the mix too. Put in the shoes of a private investigator seeking out a rock star in hiding, you come to a small Pacific Northwest-styled town in the midst of an evacuation order. Abandoned and riddled with detritus, your investigation is hampered further by an increasingly messed up cohort of creatures emerging from the ruin. This is classic survival horror through and through, but it was also a demo I could not put down. It captures perfectly that thing the Resident Evil games do so well in how it presents the spaces you navigate as inherent curiosities, locked doors posed as a question, not a frustration, and pathways that loop back around on each other in extremely pleasing ways. There's that wonderful physicality to the things you collect, even down to the fact that you need to put coins in the payphone in order to save your game. Again, it's cribbing from the best in show, and it seems to be meeting that mastery on fertile soil. Even combat feels weighty and satisfying, one thing that can sometimes be a bit of a crapshoot in games like this. I stayed up past my bedtime to play this. I don't do that for many games. I think this is great. Even though it probably doesn't really have many ideas of its own, sometimes an incredible version of something familiar creates its own buzz, and a great demo this is to end this video on. Thank you for watching. If you like the look of any of these demos, make sure to give the games a wishlist on Steam, and let me know what tickled your fancy this Nextfest. As always, a special thanks to my patrons, the Rasta Rascals, and I'll see you next time.
in